It's probably a good idea to start with my promotional Instagram text. I'm always looking, always filming, thinking, and reflecting. Drawn to the mundane, the things that I notice are often the same: birds, hands, windows, discarded, overlooked objects, and strangers unaware. The iPhone footage is key. A lot of my work is centered around unplanned moments. I like the magic of being given an opportunity to notice something and no one noticing that I've noticed. This year, I've been exploring sites of community and culture and what it means when those places aren't allowed to exist. This is the degree show work, and here's how it all started. In the summer before second year, I filmed the Mejlis in Bahrain. These are outside communal areas set up by men in the villages using discarded furniture. They hang out there in the evenings when it's cooler. When I came back to uni in second year, I made a little film with no strong narrative and began thinking about what the equivalent communal spaces are in England. I decided that the answer was the pub. The idea was put to rest as I got busy with other things until it was awakened this year. I became infatuated with the pub and ideas of community in fourth year as we were going every night in first term, especially to St. Teresa's Catholic Club, a working man's pub in Heaton. When lockdown hit, I won't lie, it was difficult. To cope, Tash and I organised an exhibition, an ode to the pub in our back garden, and I arranged a pub funeral service. I spoke to my father, who conducts funerals in Bahrain, and under his guidance I took on the role myself. This became the basis for the film I made titled The Funeral. While we were talking about the pub funeral, I asked him if he thought it was disrespectful to hold a funeral for a pub at a time where so many people were dying. And he replied by acknowledging the significance of pubs by relating them to the Mejlis without knowing I had made that connection 2 years ago. I'd say that's big magic. This was one of the first major turning points in the year. The conversation then formed the audio of Memory Lingers Here. In November, I filmed the outside of the empty closed pubs, focusing on the remnants of human activity, echoing the focus of the initial Mejlis footage. I went back to Bahrain for Christmas and was stuck there till March. I refilmed the Mejlis many times and my thematic focus changed a lot. First on the litter, then on the wide angles, and then getting super close and looking at the furniture as sculptural objects in a landscape, giving more attention to the Mejlis as a space for community. The mid-year review played a huge role in deciding what it is I actually wanted to say and questions I wanted to probe, as well as the more technical aspects such as shortening the audio or getting different shots. I began researching the history of pubs and the Mejlis and talking to people about what those places mean. I think although the footage is not shown in the film, I began looking with greater empathy, and although it was annoying that I was stuck in Bahrain, I was able to constantly go back and forth, forming my own relationship with the place, and I think that shows as the drafts progress. When I finally came back to England, I asked St. T's for permission to film inside, and this is when the film started coming together. There was a shift from the idea of a distanced observation to a more intimate exploration that was subtly tainted with loss and loneliness. I initially filmed the furniture and fabric in a similar way to how I had filmed the Mejlis, but that didn't work as they are different places, and I think that the wide shots or details of other elements within the pub work much better in this context. Making work involving themes of the pandemic, I wanted to be careful not to do so in the same way that everyone else was. The work is not led by COVID, but instead the pandemic is navigated naturally within it. I feel that the narratives of the relationship with my father and a focus on place and its significance help to do this. Ultimately, it's a film about community. In terms of setting up the space, I got a vinyl guy to come and cover up the light coming through the door. This then emphasized the lightness of the shots in Bahrain, which in turn highlighted the grittiness of the shots in the pub in England. Here's how the space is lit up depending on which place is shown. The poster on the wall was my version of a title card, as the film looped, so it didn't really have one. It was very nice seeing the viewers notice the Memory Lingers Here epigraph on the statue in the video. It also meant that I could keep the title in the film subtle enough since it was also printed on the wall. After interim, where I showed films of benches with a bench in the space, I was sure that I wanted to take an element from the degree show film into the gallery space. In March, I started looking for the perfect chair discarded by the community. They were too big, too uncomfortable, too unstable, until I found this chair on the back lanes of Heaton. I found a bar stool and a skip, covered in what I'm assuming is white paint, but it looked like bird shit. It was all coming together. I charmed some builders into giving me some concrete slabs, and then I charmed Kai into carrying it in for me. Two on top of each other were the perfect height to support the amputated chair, and the rug was sitting in a friend's loft with a hole in it, waiting for its time to shine. It was important to me that all these elements were used, discarded, donated, and with the magic of the community, just like the majlises are actually made in Bahrain. It's interesting seeing who would sit on the floor, stand next to the chairs, or take the plunge and sit on them. I wonder if people weren't sitting because of COVID, or if it was because it was set up in a white cube space and the pieces could be sculptural. It got me thinking of taking the idea forward and maybe setting up spaces outside. But mostly people sat. I wanted it to be an inviting space. A comfy chair is a universal motif. In a way, this is my own version of the Mejlis with no exclusivity. The Mejlis and the pub are both male-dominated and exclusive vibes in that you can't sit in a Mejlis if you don't know the main guy who set it up, and there's a territorial element to a local pub. There's an element of transgression in my exploration of the spaces in that I'm a woman exploring places that aren't made for me. I was really interested in these ideas initially, and I looked a lot at the works of Orit Asheri, who did Dancing with Men in 2003, where she dressed up as a man and went into these Orthodox Jewish parties that were exclusively for men. My presence with a camera in these spaces parallel themes in her film. The camera work and the edit become a rhythm-like dance, and I place a new gaze upon these spaces as she does. I was initially going to show this film in the same space as my other one, To Stroll, as I like them in conversation with one another. However, I made the formal choice to show just the one. I think though it was a difficult curatorial decision, it helped create the narrative and visuals of a communal space. I still view the two as together, but just physically separate. In a crit, Bex Harvey said something nice about the concept of splitting the screen. There are two opposing but connected screens, split in a gallery, geographically miles apart, and I guess that's also a main thematic element of both of the works. The name of the second film, To Stroll, comes from Baudelaire's concept of a flaneur, defined as a man who strolls around observing society, an inherently male act. Since writing my dissertation, I've been interested in the idea of a flaneuse, or a flan, the female or non-binary equivalents posed by Laura Elkin and Sarah Lee. Also interested in how the concept of a flaneur changes when a camera is involved. The two main events of the film include people taking pictures and I'm filming them. It's a question about how we look at others and by proxy surveillance, I guess. I've been trying to figure out where I sit in the conversation surrounding ethics and consent when filming strangers, especially because documentary film making is often judgment-filled. It's important that there's no judgment in the recounts. I don't have judgment when I watch, and so there can't be any in the films. I've been thinking about empathy and how to film empathetically. Giles said some very beautiful things that sum up what I'm trying to do. He picked up on the tenderness and affection for the strange behaviors of human beings, like a love letter about their oddities. I'm also getting the viewer to think about the way that they're looking at others. The decision to put it in the lecture theatre worked perfectly for this, because it becomes a sort of cinema, and then you have the cinematic experience which elevates the process or ritual of watching people. The posters were made from stills from the film. The main one was the pigeon, as this is shown in the film. The font I chose was equally inconspicuous, like a flaneur. As part of my practice, I'm always looking and always filming. To Stroll is a product of that relationship, and of the research I've been doing throughout the 4 years. The audio came first in the form of a text piece. I then added the visual elements from archival footage. The final year forum was another key turning point. I used the feedback that I received on the success of my voice and suggestion to use it in future work. I looked at artists such as Charlotte Prodger whilst making this. I felt it was important to include this piece in the show as it offers a perfect mirror of contrast to Memory Lingers Here. In Memory Lingers Here, I'm there to listen, versus in To Stroll, I'm there to speak. There is an offering versus taking of space, which is also interesting when considering gender. Across the two films, there's a focus on people. The films are either completely devoid of people or solely focused on them. The results are an analysis of the importance of empathetic interaction or observation. Birds are a key motif in both films, but with different meanings. The birds in Memory Lingers Here become the community and a symbol of togetherness that when the clap comes in and destabilizes the viewer, they're jolted into this film about belonging, despite abandonment. In To Stroll, the birds take on another meaning of surveillance and maybe omniscience. It was interesting exploring where I fit in the work. There are no shots of me in either films, but my voice is present, my eyes are the lens, and my perception drives the narrative. In Memory Lingers Here, I come in with a correction of the pronunciation of pub, a presence, but usually just agreeing or listening, no thoughts. Instead, the thinking is left to the viewer.